So today I'm going to be discussing something within the Dragon Ball community that I have seen a lot of talk about in the past, and not so much in the future now, just because Dragon Ball it's not really as relevant without the anime going. But it's the talk of Dragon Ball getting a reboot or getting rebooted, and it's not something that I necessarily want, but it could be interesting depending on how they did it. And so this is what it's really going to be about. Not really, like, it is kind of, could Dragon Ball be rebooted? That'll be answered pretty quickly, but also, how could they do it, and what ways could they do it? So, with that being said, if you guys do enjoy the video, please leave a like, comment, and subscribe, and hit the notification bell to be notified every time I upload a Dragon Ball video. So, I'm just going to say one thing. If Star Wars can retcon or reboot to a certain point, like they did with Star Wars Legends, by basically retconning almost everything in it, and just retconning back to the original 6 movies, then it is possible for Dragon Ball to do the same thing. If Toriyama retires, or God forbid passes away and sells his property, then maybe Shueisha, whoever would fully own it at that point, could do something different with it. Now, there are different ways to do reboots, and there's you can just completely wipe away everything and do it completely new with just the very basic things. There's also ways to do, kind of keep it fresh, but keep it classic as well, like the 2016 Ratchet and Clank video game. If you guys don't know, Ratchet and Clank was a series of video games that had a bunch of games on PS2 and PS3. It was a really good series, and then in 2016 they rebooted it. Even though it did not go well, it wasn't bad. So basically, Ratchet and Clank 2016 was about 70% the same game as the original Ratchet and Clank. About 10% of the game were influences from Going Commando and Up Your Arsenal and some of the other games littered throughout the series, and the remaining roughly 20% was being basically new story bits. So basically out of that, graphics were better, and it was still different enough to actually be considered a different game, even though it was, like I said, very similar. Like I said, it was about 70% the same game as the original Ratchet and Clank. The story were similar, a lot of same planets, same weapons, but there was just enough different to make it a new game. And they could kind of do that with Dragon Ball, especially for animation wise. Use the new modern animation, use maybe 70-60% of the same story, but change things up, add in things, modernize Dragon Ball. The power system is so old school and so basic, and honestly, in my opinion, it's somewhat boring to me now when you have other power systems that are so much better than Dragon Ball's. Maybe change the power system a bit, maybe just change up the stories, change characters, make things happen at different points. And you could still just keep the original series as a canon, and have 2 separate forms of canon from alternate realities. Kind of, not exactly, but what they do with comics, how there is different universes that have happened differently. And that's another thing. There's so many different versions and retcons and reboots of all these different comic characters. It is possible, although not that likely to happen, with Goku in the world of Dragon Ball. You could bring back old characters with new twists, bring in new characters that have not been in at all, new races, new villains. You could change up how the arcs go. You could start with the androids and then end with the Saiyans. You could do it different ways to try and modernize the story. One thing in Dragon Ball that I've kind of noticed is there wasn't a lot of foreshadowing for a lot of the stuff that happened in the series, whereas what's good about a lot of modern shonen like Black Clover, My Hero Academia, and others, there's a lot of foreshadowing bits that are added up that just pay off in the end of the story, whereas Dragon Ball, it's kind of not, things aren't really foreshadowed that well. There's still some foreshadowing, but if you do that, add foreshadowing to Dragon Ball, make it more of a good writing, because I've kind of said this in the past. Toriyama, he's not the best at writing. I think that from the beginning of Dragon Ball to the Cell Saga was a good story, not great, a good story with great concepts, and he had great art style for his manga. And then what they could do now is kind of expand upon that. Have the great art, have the great concepts that have already been added in, and create more concepts, and then have somebody who's a really good writer, or a group of really good writers, take the original Dragon Ball story and turn it on its head, and like I said, bring back old characters with new twists, bring in new characters to completely different aspects of themselves the series hasn't seen before. And one of the things I really do want to see is Just modernize the series, update the basic and somewhat boring power system. One way to easily kind of change this is to change the setting or era, and that will change the way that things play out in the story. Imagine a rebooted Dragon Ball story where Goku lands in a fantasy Lord of the Rings-like Earth instead of the technologically advanced one in the Dragon Ball canon. That would be very interesting to see how it deals with magic, with wizards, with different races. There's elves and dwarves, or just kind of different versions of different creatures, different fantasies, and stuff like that. Even make it a bit more based on the story that it was based on and inspired by, Journey to the West. The setting, at least. Maybe make it a World War II era setting, although that might not go over well just because of what happened in World War II. But honestly, the possibilities they're really endless. There is so much they could do to do this with Dragon Ball. Now, like I talked about Ratchet & Clank, the game wasn't really received well, and that is because it was a bit too much like the original Ratchet & Clank. When the game had already been released before, you had Ratchet & Clank from the PS2, then the remastered version was put on the PS3 of the original Ratchet & Clank. So they do it again on PS4, so they're basically making you buy it for a third time. And that's just not the best idea. 70% of the same game and 80% of the same original 3 is not really enough of a change. Like, if they did Dragon Ball, I think at most, as a reboot, take like 60% of the same story at most, and change up a lot. You could change up the way the arcs happen, pull out good characters, put in different ones, change some aspects to them, add new twists, maybe make it so the Super Saiyan form has actually been built up and foreshadowed from the beginning, and it happens, and then it finally pays off. You could have stuff like that. And the thing is that you wouldn't even necessarily have to reboot Dragon Ball from the beginning where Goku lands in. You could reboot Dragon Ball from the end of the Cell Saga, and instead, Gohan becomes the hero, and in this universe, or in this reboot, Goku stays in the other world. You could reboot it from any point in the series, and go from there. You could reboot it from after Frieza, you can reboot it from the Saiyans, you could even reboot it after Goku defeats King Piccolo. You can reboot it from any point, and completely change it from there on out, kind of change the rules of what exists within the universe. Now, like I said, I'm not really, hoping this happens. I don't want Dragon Ball to just get rebooted and retconned. But it is something that I do think would be very interesting if it did happen, to see how the fandom would react to that, and would it even be good? And could it be compared to the original? Honestly, I don't know. I mean, in a way, I kind of would like this to happen, because I don't really like Super, and GT, even though I like GT, is not in the same tier of quality as Dragon Ball Z or the original Dragon Ball. And it's like, if you do a reboot from the beginning, it's just a bit weird to me, because the original Dragon Ball was already so good. But that's just where I'm at this. I'm like, oh, I don't really want this to happen, but I'm not completely against it. I'm not hoping for it, but if it happens, I'll have hope that it works out. I do think it could be good, like I said, to modernize Dragon Ball, to make it a bit more with a better power system and better writing, and actually have some foreshadowing for things. Like I said, there is foreshadowing, just not as good foreshadowing as there are on other series of current shonen. Dragon Ball is like the granddaddy of them all, and you can totally tell when you read it. Basically, what I've kind of noticed is that if somebody has already watched the big three or other shonen or read it, and then you try and get them to Dragon Ball, they might not like it, or like it as much as they would if they read Dragon Ball first. And that's because the big three take a lot of what Dragon Ball already did and expand upon it. And then the other shonen that the spawn off of the big three kind of do the same thing off of the big three itself. So it makes it so that if you read Dragon Ball, it does feel outdated in a way. It's this isn't the best example to use, but it's almost like watching the original trilogy. Yes, it's great, but the graphics, the CGI is kind of meh compared to now. Still a great thing, and that's kind of what Dragon Ball is. Sometimes I have a hard time of getting friends into Dragon Ball when they've already seen things like Black Clover, My Hero Academia, One Punch Man, Death Note, Full Metal Alchemist, and things like that. Whereas if they watch Dragon Ball first, it's easier to get them to the other anime. So that's really it for my video. Let me know what you guys think down below. Would you even want a reboot? Or would you be neutral on it? Or would you be against it? And if you did want a reboot, or if you had no choice and it was going to happen, where would you want a reboot to be? Would you want to reboot from a certain point in the series? Would you want to reboot from the beginning and you just change the setting and stuff like that and the events of what happens? Let me know some of your thoughts and ideas down below. Please leave a like, comment, and subscribe. Hope you guys all have an amazing day. Peace out.